for the last few weeks. We want to recap real fast. 2 weeks ago, we talked about that we are people of the promise, and you and I need to be reminded of the promises of God, but we can't be reminded of those promises if we don't know what those promises are. And so we came to the closing of the message. You got to ask, right? If you want to receive the promises, you have to ask. So the A stands for ask, and God has given you the promises, and you have to ask for the promises. You have to remind God, and you have to take hold of those promises. You got to seek God. You got to seek His promises, seek His presence, seek His guidance, and you have to knock on the door. And when we knock on the door, we know that God is moved not by our necessity, but God is moved by your faith. And you need faith and perseverance to obtain and to receive those promises that God has for you. And then last week we talked about being armed and dangerous. We talked about we need to have the weapons of praise, the weapon of worship, the weapon of prayer this year. And what prayer does for you and I is that it aligns our heart with God, and it reminds us of who we are in Him. You are a son, you are a daughter of Jesus, and that is who we are. We're sons and daughters of God. We are not sinners. Although sin is something we do, that is not our identity. We are sons. We are saved by grace. We are washed by the blood. So that's what prayer reminds us of. And worship, what it does is that it elevates your perspective. It allows you to get on the same frequency with God and hear what He hears. And there are times when you are praying and you feel that your prayers aren't getting through, then that's when you need to add some worship to your prayer, because worship breaks down the walls, right? And today we're going to talk about faith and community, two of my favorite things that I love to preach about, and that this is my bread and butter, all right? Because I'm an extrovert, if you can't already tell, but I'm really extroverted, and I love getting to know people and getting to know their stories. And so the title of the message is Stronger Together, because I believe that as we come together as the body of Christ, as believers, you and I become stronger, right? And we've been talking about Joshua, the promised land, the walls of Jericho, and the people of Israel in the desert. And I want to give you a backstory, just in case you haven't been here. And God delivered the people of Israel out of Egypt, and He took them through a journey of the promised land that should have taken 11 days, but it took 40 years. All right, and I don't know if you've ever taken a road trip with people or with your family, but the craziest road trip I've ever taken was with my family. And I remember we drove from Dallas to Destin, which was about a 12-hour drive. And Destin, if you don't know, it's like the economy version of Miami, right? That's the best way I can put it. Then we drove from Destin to Orlando. And I'm a really adventurous person, and I influenced my dad to convince us to drive up to Washington, D.C. from Orlando. And then I convinced him to go to Boston, because what's a few more hours? We were already there. So that was all fun and games until we had to drive back, because I did most of the drive. I remember we were getting ready to cross into from Virginia to Washington, D.C., and we were on the border. We were at a rest stop, and I told my dad, hey, you got to drive because I'm tired. And I just remember getting off, getting to the passenger side, and my dad driving, and I woke up because I was hot, and the car wasn't moving. It turns out we were at the next rest stop because he was really tired, and he wanted to go to take a nap. And so I was like, I'm driving the rest of the way, Dad. If not, we're never going to be there. But just imagine a road trip with your family. It was a long road trip, and we became stronger together. Not by choice, but, by force. But just imagine that instead of a 10-day road trip or 11-day road trip with your family, you got 600,000 people trying to get to the promised land. and the GPS keeps on saying rerouting for the next 40 years. Because 10 spies that went to scout the land, the promised land, came back with a negative report. And what that did for the people of Israel, it was that it sowed a seed of unbelief. It sowed a seed of doubt. And so they began to doubt God and rebel against God. And that cost that generation the entrance to the promised land. And their community was compromised. And as they were journeying through the wilderness, the people of Israel rebelled against God. And fair enough, because when all you see is the wilderness, you become blind to the fact that it's with you through the wilderness. And so the people of Israel had the cloud by day, the fire by night, had the manna from heaven, had water from the rock, and God was in between them. God would tell them move, and they would move, yet they decided to rebel from God. Which leads me to this, that your response to the season or of the wilderness that you're going through, it matters. Because when you're going through a period of waiting, a period of trials, and all you can see is the problems, all you can see is the wilderness, all you can see is the waiting, your response matters. Because you can either get better or you can get bitter. You can either be refined by the fire, refined by the trials, or you can be defined by them. And so how you respond to life, it matters. Do we cling to God? Do we cling to His promises? Do we hang on? Do we claim those promises? Or do we compromise the promise? And that is exactly what the people of Israel did. They compromised the promise. So what does it mean to compromise? It means to accept standards that are lower than desirable. Maybe you wanted some Ugg boots, but you got some bear paws, or you wanted some Converse, but you got some Airwalks, all right? Like you compromise, which it looks the same, but is not the same. And so my challenge to you as you journey through this year is don't compromise your promise. Don't settle for something less than what God has for you. And in order for you to achieve the promise and receive what God has for you, you need to be surrounded by the right community, by the right people this year. All right? And Numbers 13:27 says, they gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. And here's the fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak, which are giants, aka the Nephilim, just giant people. All right? And so what the 10 spies did was to sow unbelief, sow doubt, sow despair. Right? They accepted defeat and gave up on the promise. Except for two people, Joshua and Caleb, which they saw the promise. They hung in there. They believed that God was going to deliver that land to them because God said so. And if God gave you a promise, God is not going to go back on His promise. He's going to fulfill the promise for you. And I'm here to tell you that it's really important who you surround yourself with and who you listen to, because your life will go in the direction of that which you truly believe. And what you truly believe is dictated by what you constantly hear and confess. So you got to be careful of who you surround yourself with. You got to be mindful, who are you letting speak into your life? Because when you let the seed of unbelief produce fruit, it turns into disobedience. And then disobedience produces fear. And then fear produces discouragement. And let me tell you today that faith and fear cannot coexist. Either you're faithful or you're fearful, but you cannot be both. And it all depends in what are you listening to and who are you listening to, that it guides you, it shapes you. And let me tell you that you don't have to listen to everything you hear. You got to guard your heart. You got to be on guard. And I remember I enjoy traveling and I like to travel. And so I was going to go skiing. And I went skiing last year. But we all know that before you board the plane, you got to go through the TSA, right? And I had a red-eye flight. They're my favorite because everybody's so quiet. Nobody wants to talk because it's usually like people, you got to be there at 3 in the morning or 4 to board the flight at 5, which I thought it was a great idea until it wasn't, and until I got stuck behind a person in TSA that was doing the most. If you've ever been there, I mean, unless you got pre-check, then that's awesome. But I don't have pre-check. I'm not there yet. I will at some point. But I got stuck behind this person that was doing the absolute most. I mean, you know, you travel enough, at least once a year or more, if you're blessed to travel, you know that you can't have any electronics, you can't have any phones, you can't have maybe even your watch, you can't have a large hoodie or a large vest, and there are certain things you can't get through TSA, and this person, I forgot my phone, and he went through and sent it back. It's like, I had my wallet was in me too, and so they send them back, and the Lord was testing me, all right, because it was early, I was hangry, and I'm just waiting on him. He's holding up the line, and I'm ready. I got all my electronics on my bin, my wallet, my keys, my shoes, my bags. I travel light, just a carry-on and a duffel bag. And I'm ready to make this TSA's agent's day by being prepared. I want to make you proud. You're doing a great job. And I go through, it scans right away. She's like, thank you for being prepared. And I was like, you know it. Bless you. And then I come out on the other side, and then I see my bag being pulled over. And I'm just like, what? Nah, that ain't my bag. That can't be. And they were like, whose bag is this? And it was like, should I say it's my bag? I don't know. And so I was like, that's mine. It was like, and they're searching the bag, and I'll have his clothing. And then they go into a pocket that I didn't even know existed. And there's a knife in my bag. And I was like, nah, that ain't mine. Somebody's trying to plant stuff on me, man. I swear. I'm a pastor. And it turns out that it was mine, indeed. And it was a gift. And they were like, you can't go through on the plane with this. It was like, well, can I put it back in the car? It was like, no, you're going to miss your flight. And I was like, okay, just throw it away. All right, so they threw it away. And I was really bummed out. But all that to say that there are things in your life, in our life, that we need to leave behind if we want to get to the next level. There are things that you cannot take with you into this year, even though we are already 12 days in. You got to leave those things behind. And sometimes it looks like friendships. It looks like previous relationships. It looks like bad habits. And 1 Corinthians 15:13 says, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. There are people that you can't take with you and you can't bring with you this year, because you cannot step into the life God created you to live without letting go of those things that put a gap between you and God, because your destination requires consecration. Your destination requires consecration. And when you're surrounded by the right community of people, community produces courage. And I'm reminded in the story of Mark chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, that says that 4 men were carrying a paralyzed man on a mat, and they couldn't bring him to Jesus because of the crowd. So they dug a hole through the roof above his head. Then they lowered the man on his mat right down in front of Jesus. And as I was reading this, it occurred to me that, so man, like, these 4 people were really invested in their friend. Because I don't have a lot of friends that would dig a hole through somebody's roof. But those are the kind of friends I need in my life. You know, hey, if I need a ride, I have people that I can call. If my car breaks down, I got people that I can call. If I need prayer, I have people that I'm accountable to and I can pray with, and they can pray with me. If I'm going through something, there's people that I can go to and people that can come to me. And so I wonder, are you surrounded by a community of people that can pray for you? Are you surrounded by a community of people that can lift you up, that can build you up and cheer you up when you're down? Because if you're not, you need to check your circle. You need to check the people around you. And let me ask you this. Do the people you give access to your life, do they give access to God in their lives? Do the people that you listen to God before they give you advice? Because here's the thing, that when your faith is falling short, when your faith isn't enough, do you have people in your life that by their faith, that by being around them, can your faith elevate? Or is all you hear is drama? Or is all you hear is negativity? Or is it all that you hear is just how bad things are, how bad their year is going? Because that is contagious. Because life isn't just about what you do. Hear me when I say this. Life isn't just about what you do. It's about who you do it with. And the people you surround yourself with, they bring meaning to every moment. And your relationships will shape the depth and the quality of your journey and your walk with God. And I believe strongly in the separation of the church and the fake, right? Nobody likes fake people. Nobody likes when somebody puts a facade. If you do, that's very unique. I've never met somebody, but I don't. And I don't know a lot of people that tolerate fake people. Because real community comes from a place of vulnerability, authenticity, and transparency. See, a lot of the times people admire our strengths, but it is in our weaknesses when we become stronger. It is in our weaknesses when we become relatable. And Ecclesiastes 4, chapter 4, verse 9 says that there is two are better than one because they have a good return in their labor. And if either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. And a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. God did not design you to go through life alone. God said in Genesis, it is not good for man to be alone. So why is it that sometimes we isolate ourselves? And I want to ask you, who is your and? Do you have an and, right? And what I mean by that is, we got David and Jonathan in the Bible. We got Ruth and Naomi. We got Paul and Silas. We have Peter and John. But then if you like to watch movies, you got Batman and Robin. You got Iron Man and War Machine. You have Bucky and Captain America. But then, hear me out, you got chips and salsa. Oh, you got nacho and cheese. Come on. Hey, even Nacho Libre had a skeleton, you know what I'm saying? The point is that you can't do life alone. You need a plus one. You need somebody. You need somebody that's going to keep you in check. Somebody that's going to call you out of your mess and into the plan that God has for your life. Man, you need people, you need leaders, small group leaders in your life who can speak into your life, who can bring hope, who can bring the word of God, who can bring you prayer, who can cheer you up when you're down. People who you give influence and authority to speak into your life. and give you advice. And that is only found in community. But let me tell you that community takes commitment. And life isn't about the relationships you have. Life is about the relationships you build. I'm going to say that again because I want it to sink in, and I think we have it on the screen. It says, life isn't just about the relationships you have. It's about the relationships you build. And the best communities are not found by chance. They're formed through commitment and trust. They're intentional. Community doesn't happen accidentally. It happens purposefully. It happens with a purpose. And see, the dangerous part is that you can find yourself here at church in a community where community is striving, where community is being created, where community is being fostered, and you can still find yourself without a community of people because it takes intentionality. It takes being vulnerable. It takes courage to get to know the person that you don't know. Man, how many times have I've been there sometimes a while ago where I'm just going to go in and dip out. And now I've seen it sometimes. It's like, hey, I was getting ready to pray and out the door. I was like, hey, man, like, all right, let's build community. Let's have the courage to not be the first one out the door and get to know people. Because when you do that, you are separating yourself from the body of Christ. And see, then you fall into the trap of isolation. And I want to talk about this, separation versus isolation. They're different. And separation and isolation are two different things that produce two different results. In isolation, it is the byproduct of loneliness. And loneliness is an emotion brought by feelings of separation from other human beings. So here's what the Bible says about isolation. In Proverbs 18:1, it says, a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire, and he rages against all wise counsel. And so what Solomon is saying here in Proverbs, he's saying like, hey, when you venture out on your own and you separate yourself from your community, from the people in your life, you are choosing to be selfish and to not listen to the advice. And so then it turns into what we call, in modern day social media and Facebook and Instagram, the lone wolf mentality. It's like, nah, man, it's just me against the world. And guys do that. I've done it before. We go through a season where I was unhealthy and I was like, nah, man, it's me against the world. I don't need nobody. I'm the alpha, I'm the wolf. I don't need a wolf pack. I'm Sigma, I'm not alpha, I'm Sigma. It's just me and God, and this season I'm just gonna go through me and God and I don't need nobody because people have hurt me, people have wronged me, and I don't need them, and people are problems, which is true. People will wrong you, people will do you wrong because that is the fallen nature of humans. But see, if your spiritual journey leads you away from community, God is not leading you in that path. God is never going to ask you to isolate yourself from community. And if you think you can do life alone, you don't understand who you are and what you need. So be careful when you think that it's just you and God, because it might be just you. So I talk about separation. Separation is different because Jesus separated himself from the crowd because he knew the importance of his relationship with God. There will be times when God will call you to separate yourself from the crowd, to stop doing certain things, to give up certain things, to consecrate you, and to prepare you for your journey. But if you're not careful, your separation can turn into isolation. And although Jesus separated himself, Jesus always returned to his community, to the crowds. I love what Hebrews 10:24-25 says. It says, and let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works. Consider the person next to you, right? Take them into account in your journey. And verse 25 says, and not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. And see, the closer you get to God, the more you begin to love people. And let me tell you this. I'm going to drop you some truth that we can all agree on. It takes more faith and more courage to love people than it does to love God. Am I right or am I right? We've all been there. You've been there. I've been there. It's like, man, like, you said this, but I'm going to love you. And people can be messy. People can be rough. People can be unpredictable. A wild card. You don't know what's going to happen. And it takes more faith to love people than to love God. But Jesus said in John 13:34-35 says, and this commandment I give you, that you love others as I have loved you. Keyword commandment is not a suggestion. It's not a suggestion. It's not an option. It's a commandment from God that we have to love each other. And I remember in 2021, I was in a season where I was thriving in my relationship with God, and I was working as the janitor of the church, which I know sounds really glamorous. And I was also the youth pastor and the production director and the closer and the opener, and anything that I needed to be, I was. But I was thriving, and I remember it was midnight, and I was just doing my thing, sweeping, mopping, cleaning the windows. And out of nowhere, I really wanted to travel, and I was like, God, I want to go to Alaska. Just for no reason. Like, I just want to go. Like, it'd be cool. There's mountains, icebergs, bears, moose, all kinds of wildlife. I want to go. It'd be cool. And that was it. It was just a wish. And then a week later, I get a phone call from my friend Jay. He was like, hey, bro, we were supposed to go on this trip in Alaska. One of the guys fell through. Would you want to go? And I was like, bro, that is awesome. I prayed to God. I was asking God, and I really want to go. And he was just like, do you want to go or not? And I was like, dude, of course I want to go. Man, come on. He was like, just buy the plane tickets. We'll figure the rest out. And so I bought the plane tickets. He was flying in from Missouri. He was like, yeah, me and my buddies are going. Like, they're pretty cool. You like them? And I was like, oh, I thought it was going to be like a bro-to-bro things. But now there's bros and other bros. Cool, whatever. But guess who I went on that trip with? Let's put the picture up. On this trip, I met in 2021 Paul Skookie and Craig Scott. That's my friend Jay Haynes. And just ignore my bad haircut. All right? But I met them on the trip, and we became good friends. Paul and I almost threw hands on the trip. We had a little disagreement, but we're cool. We bros now, right? And later on, Jay called me. He invited me to his wedding. He was like, hey, bro, come to the wedding. And I came to the wedding, and I reconnected with Paul. We didn't throw hands. We hugged, and we loved on each other. I met Craig and his wife, Megan. And then I met Jonathan. He's over here on this side. And I met Jesse, somewhere on this side. Mr. 417 is right here. And I met a couple of other people. But the coolest thing about that was that before I knew it, God was preparing a community before me. And when I came here, they were telling me, they was like, bro, like, you got to move out to Springfield. And I was like, yeah, right, brother. I'm in Dallas. He's like, bro, you're going to be a pastor here one day. And I was like, God himself will have to bring me out of Dallas into Springfield. And then a few years, I interviewed, and God opened the door for me to be here with you at Courageous. And yeah, let's celebrate that. So I say all that to say that God gives you the people you need exactly when you need them. And God didn't create you just to be connected to him. He created you to be connected with others. Because Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. See, it sounds cool and manly but the process of sharpening iron is actually pretty messy. There's sparks flying. The iron gets hot, it gets beat up, it gets hurt, and then it irons out with the friction and the heat. I say all this to tell you that the right community of people will always point you towards God. The right community of people will always sharpen you and strengthen you and keep you well-rounded and grounded in your faith. Because here's the thing, life is not about conformity, it's about community. And you cannot conform yourself to this world. But rather, God calls us to renew our mind. And when we renew our mind, we are able to see that, hey, my community around me is not the healthiest one. There's some people I gotta let go. There's some relationships I gotta let go. There's some people on social media I need to unfollow. Because the journey that God is calling you is a journey where you need the right people in your life. A journey of courage, a journey of faith. And one of the things I remember the most when I got here to Courageous was that we had a giant puzzle of East. And I didn't know it was of East because we hadn't really put it together until I went to North and they had theirs together. And I was like, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. And they came back and people started putting in the work and we figured it out. But then I realized that all those pieces by themselves didn't make sense. They were useless. They didn't have a purpose. But as the pieces began to connect themselves, it began to shape the bigger pictures. Those pieces had a purpose, and it was to be surrounded and be connected with the other pieces. Because when they got together, they formed the picture of our East building. And what I love about this church is that God has brought you. God has brought people from all over this country to assemble them to make the church. And I love that last season we had over 70 groups within both campuses. And all that to say that my call to action to you is to find your community. Find your people. We're not exclusive, we're inclusive. We're trying to get you to partner with us so you can partner with Jesus.